Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing AFMF2, which is officially out with the latest AMD driver for everybody that has RX 6000 and 7000 series GPUs, as well as some iGPUs, on the RX 7900 XTX. Let's get into it, shall we? And it's desktop time. You can see the 7900 XTX right there with the latest drivers, of course. These are the 6 games that we're testing in this video, by the way. And you can see all of the GPU specs here in Tech PowerUp's GPU zWORMz bar or AMD SAM is enabled. And on the left, I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU with half of its cores disabled, making it pretty much the same as a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D and 32GB of DDR5. Let's get into it. Alright guys, first up we got the beautiful Cyberpunk 2077. We're playing this one at 4K resolution using the high preset without resolution scaling and with these settings turned off. Everything else is set to the preset here, and if I go into the Radeon settings, you can see that AFMF2 is disabled at the moment. So I'm just gonna drive around for a couple of minutes here, see our average and 1% lows without any AFMF enabled, and then we're gonna enable that and see how it runs then. But yeah, as you can see, the baseline FPS here at 4K high settings is pretty damn good already. It's around 60 plus FPS all of the time, basically. And that's extremely smooth, but it's not a super high refresh rate experience, right? If you want that, we probably need the help of AFMF or FSR3 frame generation that they recently introduced in this game. But the problem is, the frame generation that they introduced is with FSR3, and that looks terrible in this title, okay? And it doesn't even work half of the time, so I wouldn't really utilize it. If you want a smoother experience, you're probably better off using AFMF2 instead, now that it's officially out, you know, and it's actually running well, as it should. But anyway, let's stop it right there. Actually, let me go back to that crosswalk there. There we go, this is where we started, and yeah, it was a really good experience here. And now let's enable AFMF2, which also enables Radeon anti-lag by default, and this time I'm gonna be using search mode on high and performance mode on quality. And if you read these descriptions right here, it says that this is recommended for above 1440p resolution, so that's why we're utilizing them here. Now this also enables Radeon anti-lag, which is nice as well because that will lower our lag. You can see the frame gen lag right there, by the way. And now if you look at the FPS from MSI Afterburner, they're lower than they were before. Previously we were getting 72 FPS in this scenario, now we're getting 66, but we shouldn't go by the FPS that we're getting in Afterburner because that's not showing the frame generated frames, unfortunately. So if you look at the FPS above the MSI Afterburner on-screen display on the Radeon overlay there, it is actually getting 130 frames. That's awesome. It's now a high refresh rate experience. I'm not gonna start counting our FPS because that's in MSI Afterburner, you know. And can I feel that difference? Yeah, I guess I can actually. I am running this on a 120Hz monitor. It is a little bit smoother in terms of input lag. It doesn't really matter too much, guys. As long as your average FPS before you enable AFMF2 are high enough, at like 60 plus, it will be a really smooth experience in terms of input lag, and it's barely noticeable, honestly, in single-player titles, that is. Obviously, in multiplayer shooters, competitive shooters, that's not something that you want. Yes, it will improve your FPS, but it's going to end up in a terrible experience because of the input lag. But yeah, over here, it actually kind of makes sense, you know, if you really want a higher refresh rate experience out of Cyberpunk 2077 with 4K visuals still. This is pretty nice, you know. I mean, I can't really see major artifacting around, even moving the camera like this all over the place. It's pretty stable, the image. And also, goodbye, Bob! Okay, we didn't kill Bob successfully this time, but where's my gun? Where's my gun? I want my gun! There we go. Okay. Did I disable the crosshairs? I didn't want to disable the crosshairs. Wait a second, guys. There we go. Crosshair. Yeah, there it is. I really wanted to see it with the crosshair enabled because if you pay very, very close attention to it, when I'm moving it like this, you can see a bit of a ghosting effect there. And that's because we are using frame generation through the drivers and not the one implemented inside of the game, you know. Is it a big deal? Honestly, at these frames with 130 FPS or so, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. Also, another thing that I am noticing is that the game doesn't really have much ghosting happening at the moment. That's pretty nice. Like, if you enable FSR 2.1, there will be ghosting because they never fixed that for some reason. Yeah, guys, AFMF2 is working pretty well here, and I am happy with this experience. Now, let's try it with ray tracing, because AMD GPUs aren't really that great with ray tracing, from what I have tested at least. Let's disable the resolution scaling as well. This is native resolution with ray tracing medium preset, and I'm going to disable these options as well. And it's going to be way more intensive. So our baseline FPS are barely at 30. They're not even at 30, actually. And you can see the crosshair. Yeah, you can definitely notice the artifacting right now. That's the problem with lower frame rates here when using AFMF, guys. It sucks. However, the actual visual experience, yeah, it's definitely improved over a 24 or 25 FPS experience. It looks like it is running at the 40 to 50 FPS that we're seeing in the Radeon overlay, but in reality, you're getting input lags of about 25 frames per second, so this is not playable. This is why you need a good baseline FPS to be able to play properly with AFMF2 or any form of frame generation, actually. You need good baseline FPS for that, you know? Yeah, I wouldn't really do this, guys. Maybe if we enable, like, XeSS... I'm gonna do XeSS performance. I think that looks pretty decent in this game. And look at that. Now we're getting 60 to 70 FPS. Goodbye, Bob! There we go. That was a nice goodbye, Bob. But yeah, baseline FPS are at 60 to 70. We're getting a smoothness of 120 to 130. So everything feels really nice and fluid. And it is pretty decent in terms of input lag as well. Actually, we could possibly even use Ray Tracing Ultra, for example. Yeah, let's try that. Ray Tracing Ultra with XeSS performance. This looks very similar to the LSS, by the way. I'm impressed with the quality of XeSS performance at 4K. And this is it. Let me just disable these once again. I disable these so we don't have even more artifacting, you know, because again, like, you're seeing a lot of frame generated frames, and this is with driver based frame generation once again, which isn't as good in terms of UI stuff and effect stuff. Anyway, now we're getting 50 to 60 FPS on the baseline frames, and as you know, if I disable the AFMF, it's probably going to be a little bit better than that, actually, like 10 FPS higher, but AFMF also lowers your baseline FPS a little bit, as I showed in this video. Goodbye, Bob! There we go. That was a nice Bob kill once again. And he instantly died. That was beautiful. But yeah, we're not getting that baseline 60 anymore. Does that matter too much? Honestly, no. The visual experience is still like 100 to 120 FPS, so it definitely looks really, really smooth. Ray Tracing Ultra is turned on as well, which is very impressive. With Performance XeSS, it looks really good as well. And it's just buttery smooth at the moment, guys. I thought it was going to be worse of an experience in terms of responsiveness and stuff, because it's not at 60 plus. But no, it's pretty damn doable, guys. I don't think I would have a problem at all playing like this. Wait a second. Am I seeing it skip some frames? Maybe? The frame time gets a little bit weird sometimes, but I don't think it is breaking frame gen. What is it? It's weird. It's kind of breaking it a little bit. It like drops into the 60s sometimes. if you look at the FPS over here in the Radeon overlay. Maybe if I set this to performance, let's check it out. Yeah, that doesn't drop as much. Oh no, it actually does. Okay, never mind. It's kind of the same thing. So let's just keep that on quality as you should for these discrete GPUs, as you can see right there, the bottom line. Look at that crosshair, by the way. Oh boy, yeah, that's really noticeable right now, guys. Maybe you don't want to play like this, but I mean, if you can overlook that, and if AMD manages to somehow fix the crosshair issues with a future update to AFMF, maybe AFMF2, you know, will fix that, it could be even better. But if you're not distracted by that stuff, this is already a pretty impressive implementation, guys, and it's a nice thing to have on these Radeon GPUs as well. So I'm gonna stop it right there, and this was bigger than I expected. That's what she said. So I'm gonna be a little bit quicker in the next few games. Alright, next is Counter-Strike. Are you serious? CS2, guys. Okay, a game where you should not use frame generation, but, well, just for fun reasons and for testing reasons, let's try it out. Alright, we're at 4K resolution using very high settings with no MSAA here, and it is getting 300 plus frames per second, basically. Oh, we gotta go with a Glock now. Great stuff. I'm gonna start counting our FPS. It's going to be buttery smooth already, obviously. There's absolutely no need for frame generation here, but I want to see how much the input lag affects us while doing these flick shots and stuff like that, and just playing the game in general. Obviously, for a competitive scenario, you should probably go with, like, the low settings. But so we are fully GPU bound, I am using the very high settings. And it's dropping into the 200s sometimes now that the deathmatch filled up a little bit. Alright, there we go. Some nice... Oh, damn it, that guy was waiting for us. Okay. But yeah, we're doing some nice shots here with the AWP, as usual. So I'm gonna stop it there, because we don't care about the non-AFMF stuff, right? Alright, here we go. AFMF2 is now enabled. For some reason, I can still move my mouse even in this menu. That's weird, and I was shooting the AWP. And as you can see, now we're down to like 220-ish frames per second. I'm not sure why I count the FPS. I'm sorry, sometimes I forget. But yeah, sometimes it can actually drop down into the 100s, as you saw there, in terms of the baseline FPS that we're getting without the FG. But if you look again at the Radeon settings overlay, it is at 300 plus, 400 FPS sometimes. Not as much of a gain as we saw with like Cyberpunk, I think. And I can still flick shot with this, but I can definitely feel the little difference in input lag sometimes, guys. Okay, it is not flawless like this. Oh boy, okay, damn it. That's probably not why I am dying a little bit more often. That's just down to luck here in deathmatch, you know. But it doesn't feel better at all. It's actually a worse experience, even though we're getting higher FPS. Obviously, if you had like a 500 Hz 4K monitor, maybe you could take advantage of it and maybe you could see the extra frames then. But yeah, even then, I'd prefer to have zero input lag. Something feels off, basically. It's like you enabled VSync, the input lag that we're getting right now. It's very, very similar to that. Oh, damn it! How did that miss? So again, guys, it is what I expected. Oh. Yeah, it just gets more input lag and it's worse in a competitive shooter. Even in any first-person shooter, I wouldn't really use... That guy didn't see us. I wouldn't use the frame generation features. And that's why I don't get in, like, Call of Duty Warzone, for example. They have frame generation from FSR 3, and why? It's better, in my opinion, to play with 50 FPS without frame generation than 120 FPS with frame generation in first-person shooter games. Now we have an extremely intensive title, Alan Wake 2 at 4K using high settings preset and no ray tracing. Ray tracing just kills this GPU completely in this title, guys. I have tried it in the full Sunday video, the review of it. Yeah, it wasn't a good experience. But But as you can see, it's getting like 40 to 50 frames per second most of the time in one of the most intensive areas in the entire game. It's not great, you know, but I mean, pretty much all of the GPUs in the market struggle to run this title, especially with ray tracing. Even like the 4090, I think the 4090 is probably the only one that can actually run it at 60 plus FPS at 4K native high settings without ray tracing. Okay, anyway, moving on. The solution to getting more FPS is quite simple here. You just enable some FSR2 and then it looks very, very good still with FSR2 upscaling in this title. And as you can see now, it puts us into the 80s and 70s. Still not a super high refresh rate experience, but this is how I would play this title. So let's see if AFMF can actually improve anything over this experience while keeping the native resolution. We're getting 47 FPS now that the frame time stabilized. And let's enable the AFMF2 over here, still using the same settings there. FPS baseline dropped by like 1 or 2 frames per second, so pretty much the same thing in terms of input lag as we were seeing with 40 FPS, with the added 13 milliseconds of frame gen lag, I guess. But now the FPS that we see in the on-screen display from the Radeon settings are much higher, guys. It feels very smooth. Although I wish the input lag was a little bit better. I think with like a controller, for example, if you're all about that smoothness, it will feel really, really nice here with 90 FPS. The 99th percentile lows on the on-screen display from the Radeon settings are also pretty good. Sometimes they fluctuate a bit, but that's because the game stutters every now and again, you know. It's not well optimized, really. But now let's try it with quality FSR2, which renders the game at 1440p and upscales it to 4K. Remember, we had a baseline FPS of around 80 frames per second in this area, so it's a little bit lower now, but the actual frame rate that you're seeing, the smoothness, is at 150 plus. That is actually absolutely insane, guys. Holy crap. While moving the camera, it does drop a little bit, the 99th percentiles, which is pretty weird, actually. Maybe it is because of this not being set to performance. Let's try it on performance. In Cyberpunk, it didn't really make a difference, but maybe it does here. No, it still drops down into the 50s and 60s, the percentiles. But yeah, either way, with that quality or performance setting, it's going to feel really, really smooth. And I guess the performance setting is more adequate for higher refresh rates, so maybe just enable that if you do care about that smoothness. So yeah, I think it definitely improves the experience here for a high refresh rate panel, but I was already fine with the 80 FPS experience with FSR quality, high settings, and 4K resolution. I think I'd choose that. If you're into that super high refresh rate experience in a single player title like this, AFMF2 will do a great job. It doesn't degrade image quality at all from what I'm seeing. I can't really notice artifacting or anything. And it's great. Like, that's what you can expect in some single player titles that don't have any HUD elements like this one. Like, no crosshairs or anything, no maps, so there's no ghosting around that. Next is Elden Ring at 4K using the max settings without motion blur, and as you can see, it's getting 60 FPS because this game is capped to 60 FPS. You can unlock it using mods, but I found it to be more stuttery when you do so. And this is where the frame generation from AFMF comes in to save the day. Without unlocking the FPS using mods, you can actually run the game at 120 frames per second. So let's do that, enable it, it's set to high-end quality right here. I think it is working, but for some reason... Oh, okay, so I can't really see the extra frames because this game set itself to 60 Hz for some reason with my capture card. So that's why I'm not really seeing a difference in terms of smoothness, but I guess it is working because the ground is a little bit weird sometimes. Yeah, I can see a bit more blurriness happening on the grass, for example. If you take a look at the horns of the roach, actually, yes, it's a little bit weirder. This is without motion blur, but it kind of looks like it has motion blur. But the good thing is, if you're running this at 120 Hz or 144 Hz, basically a high refresh rate panel, it will feel high refresh rate this time. even without unlocking the FPS, and keeping that frame time flat. So this is definitely the way that I would be playing Elden Ring if it wasn't with the capture card. But of course, with the capture card, it had to set itself to 60 hertz because it doesn't like me very much. Actually, capture cards are just a pain, guys, unfortunately. But again, if I wasn't utilizing it, I would be able to see those 120 FPS all of the time, and it would feel absolutely buttery smooth. And since it's a single-player title, it wouldn't really matter too much that we're having a little bit higher input lag. Honestly, in this particular game, the input lag is barely noticeable. Oh my god. With that little stutter, I actually could see the generated frames for a second. If you pause there, yeah, it's pretty noticeable, the motion blur that is happening because of AFMF. Yeah, it's down to personal preference, of course. If you prefer the smoother experience, AFMF2 will do a great job here in Elden Ring, but if you prefer the sharper image quality, I think disabling it makes sense, because back when I tested the RX 6600 with AFMF2 as well, I saw that Elden Ring was looking terrible with it. And here at 4K resolution, well, it doesn't look terrible, but it definitely looks a lot blurrier. Now, it's Forza Horizon 5 at 4K using TAA and the max settings, and well, it's getting already really good FPS at 120, close to it on average, I guess, dropping down sometimes, but it's going to be absolutely fantastic of an experience, even without AFMF. But what about the city area? My god, what the hell? Okay, I'm gonna start counting our FPS. We're gonna go through the city. As you can see, it's dropping down into the 90s. And that's absolutely terrible. You don't want to drop into the 90s. 90s is completely unplayable. I'm just kidding, of course. This is absolutely great of an experience. No need to utilize AFMF once again. Anyway, it drops down into the 80s in the minimums, which is worst case scenario there outside of the tunnel, you know, or getting out of the tunnel actually. But now let's turn on that AFMF2 and see if we can get like a 240 FPS experience or close to it for an even higher refresh rate panel at 4K resolution. Now, first impressions in terms of visuals, it looks pretty good. I'm not seeing a major difference. Maybe the trees and the bushes are slightly more shimmery, but I mean, it's super minor. And of course, baseline FPS went down as usual with AFMF2, but the actual frame rate, the actual FPS that your eyes will see are at 180 plus. At 4K resolution native, guys. This is pretty good once again. And in terms of the UI, it's static. There's no crosshairs or anything like that, so no problems in that regard. Around here, maybe you can see a little bit more of motion blur on like the ground and stuff. Little stutter right there, by the way. But yeah, it's so minor that doesn't really bother me at all in this particular title. If I had a 240 Hz 4K panel, I think I would choose to play with AFMF2 in this particular one, as it would make you see more frames than at like 80 FPS, 1% lows, and 110 FPS average, whatever we were getting before, right? So, it just smooths out your experience. Since it's a racing title, not a first-person shooter, it works very well here with the added input lag of frame generation, which is very minimal. Once again, it's 7 milliseconds. You're not likely noticing that. I think this is one of the best games to use this technology in my opinion, guys. Can't really see anything wrong with it. And lastly, I have Red Dead Redemption 2 at 4K using the maximum settings, aside from the water physics and the tree tessellation here. And I actually tested this yesterday, so I know what to expect. Come on, Bob, let's go. Yeah, it is already a great experience at 4K resolution with 80 to 90 FPS average most of the time. I'm going to Strawberry, which is the most intensive area. As you can see, no stutters whatsoever. It's somewhat of a high refresh rate experience. Not really, but, you know, it feels better than 60 Hz or 60 FPS still. And it's just it's an amazing experience already, even without AFMF2. Again, that's the thing with these high-end GPUs. Even if you don't use frame generation, it's going to be great. But let's try it out now with that FG enabled. Here we go, AFMF2 is now enabled, same settings there, and okay, it was just applying there. And it's getting the smoothness now of 140 frames per second with pretty decent input lag still because, well, the baseline FPS are still very high, above 60 FPS. But again, I mean, even though it is a smoother experience visually speaking, it was already such a great experience even without AFMF, right? That I don't feel the need to do this. But hey, that's up to you. Obviously, it's just my opinion. I think I would stick to the native stuff, especially because this is indeed making it a little bit more motion blurry in some areas, right? You got some artifacting with the crosshairs and stuff, although it's not noticeable right now because it's kind of transparent. But yeah, in my opinion, and with my eyes right here looking at the 42-inch monitor, big monitor, so I can notice all of this stuff and the artifacts and imperfections, you know, I can see that the grass quality when moving around fast with Roach right here, it is a little bit worse. We also got some screen tearing right now that I've been noticing as well, since we are above the 120 Hz refresh rate. But for that's an easy fix. You know, all you need to do is go here, enable Radeon Chill, and select the FPS a little bit below your frame rate. I actually set it to 60 right now, and it was still having a little bit of screen tearing, so I'm just gonna do 57 right there. If you have a 144 Hz monitor, do like 70 frames per second, for example. And now there should be no screen tearing, because the FPS that we're getting are 114 on the on-screen display from the Radeon settings, 57 on MSI Afterburner, so we're within the adaptive sync of this monitor. Some people complained about me using this on auto at 1080p with the 6600 when I tested that with AFMF2, and on high it supposedly improves smoothness at the cost of a little bit of image quality basically, and especially whenever you turn your camera around really fast, it's supposed to improve the smoothness there. And here it just reduces the performance overhead. I'm gonna try to use like performance as well, see if that changes anything. No, it's still the same thing, dropping down the FPS to 60 when you do this really fast. So it still falls apart a little bit when you move your camera really, really fast and in quick succession as well. I'm gonna go back to quality here. Yeah, same thing. I mean, it's not a problem because most of the time you're just gonna move around the camera like this and it doesn't break your FPS if you do this. It's just, if you do this, it will start breaking a little bit. So don't do that. And especially with a controller, you can't even do that. So if you're playing with a controller, maybe enable it and just play with AFMF all of the time. It's going to feel smoother or look smoother as well. But I myself would choose no AFMF because it was already an awesome experience. And with all of that said, guys, thanks very much for watching this video. In some games, AFMF is totally worth it. In others, not so much. It's all down to personal preference, of course. So your opinions may vary a lot. I've seen some people that always turn on AFMF2 no matter what, even in first-person shooters. I would totally avoid it in first-person shooters once again, but in single-player games like this, it's worth at least giving it a shot, in my opinion. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.